The rain on Viridia Prime was a constant, gentle whisper, a sound that had become the backdrop to Jax's entire existence. It pattered against the broad, waxy leaves of the xenoflora outside his greenhouse and drummed a soft rhythm on the reinforced glass roof. He didn't mind it. The rain meant life for his plants, and the solitude meant peace for him. People were complicated, their emotions as turbulent and unpredictable as a solar flare. Plants, however, were honest. They needed water, light, and good soil. He understood that. Wiping his hands on his worn trousers, he surveyed the day's work. The spore ferns were finally fruiting, and the twilight orchids were beginning their nightly glow. It was enough. His own lunch, a thick sandwich stuffed with protein paste and the crisp, purple leaves of a local cultivar, sat wrapped on his workbench. He was about to reach for it when a movement outside caught his eye, a flicker of gray against the green and brown ruins that bordered his compound. Probably just a glimmer moth, he thought, but the glimmer moths were iridescent blue. This was different. He squinted, peering through the water-streaked glass. The ruins were the skeleton of an old Terran survey outpost, picked clean by time and scavengers. Nothing of value remained, and the local wildlife knew to steer clear of his territory. Curiosity, a trait he usually suppressed, got the better of him. He pulled on his heavy coat and stepped out into the drizzle. The air was cool and smelled of wet earth and ozone. He moved quietly, his boots sinking into the soft moss as he approached the broken permacrete wall. And then he saw her. Crouched behind a collapsed support beam was a woman. She was huddled against the rain, her clothes once fine, now torn and mud-stained, clung to a slender frame. Her skin was a pale, opalescent silver, and her hair, though matted with dirt, was the color of spun moonlight. But it was her eyes that held him, wide, amethyst-colored pools, currently filled with a raw, animal fear. She was shivering, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She wasn't human, that much was obvious, but she wasn't like any of the other alien traders or prospectors who occasionally passed through the sector. There was an unnatural grace to her. Even in her desperate state, their eyes met, and she flinched, pressing herself harder against the wall as if trying to vanish into it. "Hey," Jax said, his voice low and calm, the way he'd speak to a startled animal. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't respond, just watched him with those terrified, luminous eyes. He took a slow step closer, keeping his hands visible. He noticed then how thin she was, the sharp angles of her collarbones pressing against her skin. She was starving. He thought of his sandwich, sitting warm and waiting on the bench. It wasn't much, just a simple meal, but it was food. He had more inside. Without breaking eye contact, he slowly reached into the large pocket of his coat and pulled it out. The wrapper crinkled in the quiet, damp air. He unwrapped it carefully, the scent of fresh baked bread and earthy greens filling the small space between them. Her eyes flickered from his face to the sandwich, and a faint, desperate sound escaped her lips. "Here," he said, holding it out. "It's food. You're safe to eat it." She hesitated, her body trembling with a war between hunger and fear. Finally, instinct won. Her hand, slender and long-fingered, darted out and took the offering. She brought it to her mouth and took a small, tentative bite. Then another, faster. Her eyes widened, not in fear this time, but in sheer, unadulterated wonder. She chewed slowly, savoring the simple flavors as if they were a delicacy from the core worlds. A small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief escaped her. She looked up at him, and for the first time, the fear in her eyes was tempered by something else. Gratitude. The rain began to fall harder, plastering her silver hair to her forehead. Jax knew he couldn't leave her out here. "Come on," he said, gesturing back towards the warm, lit greenhouse. "You can't stay in this. Come inside where it's dry." She looked from him to the shelter, uncertainty clouding her features. She whispered a single word, her voice like the chime of a distant bell, though he didn't understand the language. Then, softer, she tried another word, one she must have learned somewhere in her travels. "Human." He nodded. "Yeah, human." She repeated the word to herself, as if testing its weight. "Human." She looked at the half-eaten sandwich in her hand, then back at his face. Slowly, carefully, she rose to her feet, her movements fluid and elegant despite her weakness. She took a hesitant step toward him, then another, until she stood just an arm's length away. Jax turned and led the way, not looking back, trusting she would follow. He pushed open the greenhouse door, a wave of warm, humid, life-scented air washing over them. He stepped aside to let her in. She paused on the threshold, her amethyst eyes taking in the incredible sight, the towering, bioluminescent fungi, the vines heavy with strange fruit, the rows of flourishing terran vegetables. It was a pocket of vibrant life in a world of gray rain and green moss, a place of peace. She looked at Jax, the human who had shared his food without a second thought. And then she stepped inside. The greenhouse door hissed shut, sealing them in a world of warm, humid air that smelled of damp earth, blooming night flowers, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the rain outside. The sudden shift from the grim, gray downpour to this vibrant, living sanctuary was so profound it felt like stepping into another dimension. Saren stood frozen just inside the doorway, her amethyst eyes wide with a mixture of awe and lingering trepidation. The rain streaked the glass walls around them, blurring the outside world into a watery abstraction, making the interior feel all the more like a sacred, isolated bubble. Jax moved slowly, deliberately, hanging his wet coat on a hook by the door. He didn't look directly at her, giving her space to absorb her surroundings. "It's not much," he said, his voice a low rumble against the gentle patter of rain. "But it's dry." He watched from his periphery as her gaze traveled over the towering, fan-like leaves of the chrysanthemum plants, the hanging baskets of vines that glowed with a soft, blue bioluminescence, and the orderly rows of terran vegetables he cultivated for his own table. Her fear seemed to ebb, replaced by a dawning curiosity. She took a tentative step forward, her slender hand reaching out to hover near the petal of a large, trumpet-shaped flower that pulsed with a slow, golden light. "It won't bite," Jax said, a faint smile touching his lips. "It's a soundness bloom. It absorbs sound waves, makes everything quiet." Her fingers finally made contact with the velvety petal, and a look of pure wonder crossed her face. She looked at him, her eyes questioning. "Quiet," he said, enunciating the word carefully. Her lips moved, forming a silent approximation. Then she pointed a delicate finger at herself. "Saren," she whispered, her voice like a soft chime. The name hung in the air. "Beautiful and strange." Jax nodded, placing a hand on his own chest. "Jax, Jax," she repeated, and the way she said it, with a soft, sibilant breath, made it sound like a secret. He gestured for her to follow him to the central area of the greenhouse, where a small, makeshift living space was nestled among the plants. A low table was strewn with data slates and plant specimens, and a single, comfortable chair sat beside a heating coil that glowed a warm orange. He motioned for her to take the chair while he pulled up a storage crate for himself. "You're still hungry," he stated, not asking. He moved to a small preservation unit and pulled out a bowl of leftover stew from the previous night. Heating it quickly, the rich aroma of root vegetables and seasoned broth filled the air. He placed the steaming bowl and a spoon before her, along with a glass of water. She looked from the food to him, that same wariness in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had been taught that gifts always had strings attached. "I already ate," he said softly, though his own sandwich was still sitting, half forgotten, on his workbench. "It's just food, Saren. Nothing more." Something in his tone, the sheer lack of expectation, seemed to convince her. She picked up the spoon with a graceful, if slightly unsteady, hand and began to eat. Each bite was measured, deliberate, as if she were committing the taste and the feeling of warmth to memory. As she ate, her posture relaxed, the rigid line of her shoulders softening. Jax busied himself with a nearby plant, pruning a few yellowing leaves. He noticed her watching his hands, her eyes following the precise snip of the shears. "It's a Terran tomato," he explained, holding up a small, green fruit. "It's not ripe yet. When it is, it turns red. Sweet." She finished her stew and set the spoon down with a quiet finality. "Sweet," she said, testing the new word. She then pointed at the tomato plant, then at her own eyes, and made a gentle opening motion with her hands. "You watch it." "Change," Jax guessed. She nodded, a faint, earnest light in her eyes. She stood and walked over to the plant, her movements now more confident. She leaned in, not touching, but examining the leaves. Her brow furrowed, and she pointed to a nearly invisible webbing between the stem and a leaf, then to a tiny, almost microscopic mite crawling there. Jax leaned in, surprised. He hadn't even noticed the pest. Aphids, he grumbled. Nuisance. Saren looked around, her gaze sweeping the greenhouse until it landed on a patch of pungent, purple herbs. She pointed at it, then back at the aphids, and made a crushing motion with her fingers. Then a sweeping away gesture. You mean, use that herb as a repellent? Jax asked, impressed. She nodded, a small, genuine smile finally gracing her features. It transformed her face, lighting it from within. Scent, strong. They leave. In that moment, she was no longer just a frightened, starving refugee. She was someone who understood the silent language of growing things, a kindred spirit. Before Jax could respond, a low, deep thrumming vibrated through the glass walls of the greenhouse, causing the water droplets to shiver. The sound was unmistakable, the engine hum of a heavy starship entering the atmosphere. Saren's smile vanished. Her face went pale, and the fear returned to her eyes, tenfold. She shrank back, away from the glass, her body trembling again. Jax moved to the window, peering through the streaks of rain. High above, through the breaks in the clouds, he could see the distant, dagger-like silhouettes of patrol craft, their navigation lights cutting through the gloom. They were searching, and he knew, with a cold certainty, that they were searching for her. He turned back to her. She was watching him, her expression a silent plea, the fragile trust they had built over a bowl of stew, and a shared understanding of plants hung in the balance. You're safe here, he said, his voice firm and low. The greenhouse is shielded. Their scanners can't penetrate the leaded glass. They won't see you. He wasn't entirely sure it was true, but he needed it to be. She held his gaze, and slowly, very slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased a little. The ships were a reminder of the world outside, a world that wanted her. But in here, for now, there was warmth, there was life, and there was a connection that had taken root in the most unexpected of soils. The rain continued to fall, sealing them in their fragile, green world. Just for a little while longer, the thrum of the patrol ships faded, but a new, heavy silence descended upon the greenhouse. Saren remained motionless, a statue of silver and fear, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as if she could still see the threats circling above. The simple comfort of the meal, the quiet exchange over the plants, had evaporated, leaving a chilling awareness of the danger she was in. Jax watched her, the pieces clicking into place, the elegance of her bearing, the fine, now ruined fabric of her clothes, the innate knowledge that felt more like education than instinct. This was no simple refugee, no lost trader. The intensity of the search confirmed it. Saren, he said, his voice gentle but firm, pulling her gaze from the sky. Those ships, they're for you, aren't they? She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture that made her look heartbreakingly young. She gave a single, sharp nod. Who are you? He asked, not demanding, but with a soft urgency. Really? She hesitated, her amethyst eyes searching his face, looking for any hint of deception or greed. Finding only steady, patient concern, she let out a shuddering breath. Her hand went to the collar of her tunic, fingers fumbling with a hidden seam. From it, she withdrew a small, teardrop-shaped crystal that hung from a nearly invisible chain. It was clear and unassuming, but as she closed her hand around it, it began to glow with a soft, internal light. She held her clenched fist out between them, then slowly opened her fingers. A holographic image, no larger than her palm, blossomed above her palm. It was a complex, geometric symbol, a stylized star cluster encircled by a wreath of alien flora, all rendered in shimmering, silver light. It was a seal, a royal seal. Jax had seen enough galactic news feeds to recognize the general heraldry of the Kylasian star dominion. His breath caught in his throat. Your royalty. The words hung in the humid air, absurd and terrifying. Not yet, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I am the heir, the Reaner. She struggled for the translation. The first daughter, the princess. Jax finished, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. He was a botanist on a backwater world. Princesses were characters from stories, not shivering, starving women in his greenhouse. She nodded, closing her hand, extinguishing the symbol. My name is Serenikailos Vitalrin. The formal name was a wave of cold water, solidifying the immense gap between them. There is a faction, the House of Moor. They wish an alliance, a marriage, to unite with their bloodline, to secure power. Her face contorted with a mixture of disgust and fear. The Moor are cruel. Their rule would be a fist of iron. I would not be a symbol for that. So I ran. My shuttle was damaged. I crashed here. Jax sank onto his crate, the weight of her confession pressing down on him. He hadn't just offered a sandwich to a hungry stranger. He had harbored a fugitive galactic princess, a political pawn whose disappearance could trigger an interstellar incident. The patrols outside weren't just looking for a missing person. They were hunting for a commodity of immense strategic value. And if they find you? He asked, though he dreaded the answer. They take me back, she said, her voice hollow. The marriage will proceed. My will is not considered. It is duty. She looked at him, her eyes pleading for understanding. To them, I am a key to a throne, not a person. You saw a person outside. The sound of engines returned, much louder this time. The deep thrum was replaced by the high-pitched whine of landing thrusters. Dust and rainwater shaken from the greenhouse framework pattered down around them. They were landing. Right outside, Seren's composure broke. A single, silver tear traced a path down her cheek. I am sorry, Jax. I have brought this to your door. Before he could respond, a sharp, electronic knock reverberated through the main airlock door of his living quarters. Adjacent to the greenhouse, a voice, amplified and harsh, barked in stilted common galactic. By the authority of the Kylasian Star Dominion, open this facility. We are searching for a fugitive of the crown. Jax's mind raced. He could lie, but they would skin the building. He could fight, but he was one man with gardening tools. His eyes fell on Seren, standing proud yet broken, the ghost of her royal seal still seeming to shimmer in the air between them. He saw the girl who had marveled at a somnus bloom, not the princess. He stood up, his decision made. Get behind the water filtration tank, he whispered, pointing to a large, cylindrical unit shrouded by thick ferns. Don't make a sound. She looked at him, stunned that he was still trying to protect her. Jax, no, go, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. She slipped into the shadows behind the ferns just as the electronic knocking turned into a series of percussive blows. The door wasn't going to hold. Jax took a deep breath, schooled his features into what he hoped was a look of annoyed confusion, and manually disengaged the lock. The door hissed open to reveal three tall Kylasian guards clad in armor of polished gray alloy, etched with the same star cluster symbol Seren had projected. Their helmets were off, revealing stern, angular faces with eyes of cool, metallic gray. The lead guard, his insignia marking him as a captain, stepped forward. His name, Kellen, was etched on his breastplate. Human, you operate this installation? Kellen's voice was as cold as his eyes. I do, Jax said, crossing his arms. Is there a problem? You're scaring my plants. We are tracking a high-value target, a Kylasian female. You will submit to a scan and answer our questions. It was not a request. I haven't seen anyone, Jax said, holding the man's gaze. It's been a quiet season. Just me and the photosynthesis. Kellen's eyes narrowed. He gestured, and one of the other guards raised a scanner, its red beam sweeping the room. It passed over the workbench, the heating coil, the chair where Seren had sat. Jax's heart hammered against his ribs. The beam swept toward the dense foliage where she was hidden. That it was then that Seren stepped out. She did not emerge as the frightened woman from the ruins. She moved with an innate, regal authority, her head held high, her shoulders squared. The tear was gone from her cheek, replaced by a mask of cool composure. The air in the greenhouse seemed to still. Captain Kellen, she said, her voice ringing with formal clarity. You may lower your scanner. Your search is concluded. The guards instantly snapped to attention, their fists striking their chests in a synchronized salute. Kellen's stern expression did not change, but a flicker of something relief crossed his features. My Lady Reener, We have been searching for 3 cycles. The Sovereign is gravely concerned. I am aware, Saren replied, her gaze flickering to Jax for a fleeting second. A world of unspoken apology in her eyes before returning to the captain. This human was unaware of my status. He offered shelter to a stranger in need. His actions were those of compassion, not treason. You will ensure he faces no reprisals. Kellen gave a curt nod. Of course, my lady. Now, you must come with us. The diplomatic situation is delicate. Saren took a slow step forward, then another, walking past Jax as if he were just part of the scenery. But as she passed, her hand brushed against his. It was a whisper of contact, lasting less than a second, but it sent a jolt through him. It was a thank you and a goodbye. She stopped at the doorway, a princess again, poised to return to her gilded cage. She didn't look back. The union with the House of Moore awaits your return, my lady, Kellen said, his tone implying it was a settled matter. Saren's regal posture didn't falter, but Jax saw the slightest tremble in her hand before she clenched it into a fist. I am aware of my duties, Captain, she said, her voice like ice, and stepped out into the rain, leaving Jax alone in the suddenly immense and empty silence of his greenhouse. The greenhouse felt like a tomb after they left. The vibrant colors of the plants seemed muted, the hum of the life support systems a dull mockery of the silence that had swallowed Saren whole. Jax stood rooted to the spot, the ghost of her touch on his hand burning like a brand. He saw the look in her eyes, not just fear, but a profound, soul-crushing resignation. She was walking back to a fate she viewed as a slow death, all to keep him safe from reprisals. He couldn't let that be the end of it. He wasn't a soldier or a politician. He was a man who understood growth, patience, and the stubborn will to live. And he had seen that same will in her, in the way she had examined his plants, in the way she had fought to survive in the ruins. He moved to the window. The Kylasian shuttle, a sleek, menacing vessel, sat on the landing pad, its ramp still down. He could see Saren standing under the protection of the hull, Captain Kellen at her side, speaking into a communicator. They were waiting for a larger ship to dock and take her aboard. He had minutes, maybe less. His mind, usually methodical and calm, raced through possibilities. A direct assault was suicide. Pleading with the guards would be useless. But he wasn't entirely powerless here. He had knowledge. He had a voice. And he had something to say. His eyes scanned his greenhouse, his sanctuary, until they landed on the reason she had stepped out of hiding, the soundless bloom. The flower that absorbed sound, that created a bubble of quiet. An idea, fragile and desperate, began to take root. He rushed to his workbench, grabbing a small, high-intensity nutrient injector. He then went to a secluded corner where a single, unique plant grew. It was his own creation, a hybrid he called a stellara. It had taken him years to cultivate, a fragile thing that produced a single, breathtaking bloom once a year. The flower was now in full glory, its petals a deep, cosmic blue speckled with flecks of silver that looked like a starfield, and at its center, a cluster of bioluminescent stamens pulsed with a soft, golden light. It was a piece of the night sky, made flora, with painstaking care. He used the injector to sever the stem at its base, preserving a tiny nutrient pod to keep it alive for a few hours. He cradled the stellara in his hands, its light reflecting in his determined eyes. He took a deep breath and walked out of the greenhouse into the rain. The 2 junior guards immediately snapped their weapons up, aiming at his chest. Kellen stepped in front of Saren, his hand on his sidearm. Human, return to your facility. This is your only warning. Saren stared at him, her regal mask cracking with sheer panic. Jax, no. Go back inside. Ignoring the weapons, ignoring the captain, Jax kept his eyes locked on Saren. He walked forward until the gun barrels were almost touching his tunic. He stopped. He didn't look at Kellen. He spoke only to her. You told me that on your world, deserts mean rebirth, he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying over the hiss of the rain. You bury the past in the sand and rise again. He held out the stellara blossom, its starry petals glistening with droplets. This is a stellara. It's the only one of its kind. It needs quiet to grow. It needs patience. It needs a safe place to put down roots. Kellen sneered. You risk your life for a flower, botanist? Jax finally flicked his gaze to the captain. No, I'm risking it for an idea. He looked back at Saren, his voice softening, imbued with a fierce conviction. You aren't a key to a throne. You are a person who understands that true strength isn't in a clenched fist, but in a helping hand. You told me that my kindness was a strength. So is yours. Don't let them bury that in the sand. He took another step, pushing past the barrel of the rifle, and held the flower out to her. You don't have to accept the crown they want to give you. You can grow your own. The air crackled with tension. The guards looked to Kellen, awaiting the order to fire. Saren looked from Jax's earnest, rain-soaked face to the exquisite, star-filled flower in his hands. It was a symbol of everything her life had never been allowed to be: unique, fragile, beautiful, and free. It was the antithesis of the cold, political marriage and the iron rule of the House of Moore. Tears welled in her amethyst eyes, mingling with the rain. The rigid posture of the Rainer melted away, leaving only Saren. She reached out, her fingers gently brushing against his as she took the Stellara. She held it to her chest, the golden light pulsing against her heart. Then she turned to Captain Kellen, her voice no longer that of a resigned princess, but of a queen making her first, definitive decree. The alliance with the House of Moore is declined. She stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Inform my father that I will return to Kylos, but I will negotiate our future myself. I will build it on trade, on cultural exchange, on the principles I found here in this garden. She looked at the flower, then at Jax, on kindness. Kellen was stunned into silence. The order to retrieve her had been absolute, but he was sworn to the royal house, to the bloodline. He looked at Saren, truly looked at her, and saw not a fugitive, but his future sovereign, radiating an authority he had never seen in her before. It was an authority born not of command, but of conviction. He slowly, hesitantly, lowered his weapon. He bowed his head. As you command, my lady. Saren stood her ground, the Stellara glowing in her hands, a tiny beacon of defiance in the storm. She had chosen her path, and she had chosen it because a simple botanist had been brave enough to offer her a flower, and in doing so, had reminded her of who she was.